Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. I'm Dan, joined as ever by Owain. Owain, how are you doing today?
Not bad. Yeah, not bad. How are you?
Yeah, all right. Some minor knee pain, which you might have seen from my Strava, which is pretty annoying. But other than that, I'm trying to see the positives. I've been out on my gravel bike, which I got for my 30th birthday a year ago, and it's been ridden about 10 times. So I enjoyed getting out on my local trails, but might try jog later. Knees feeling a bit better.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, today we're going to delve into the world of ultra running a bit more. I know we've done a whole Road 2 series building up to Barrier 40, but I think we've underexplored this topic. So I think we're labeling this as a first dive into the physiology of ultra running. Like what are the physiological determinants? What do we know? What do we not know about ultra running performance and its physiology, and probably how does it differ from the shorter events? So that's the topic of conversation for today. But before we get into that, let's give a shout out to Soar, our sponsor, our podcast sponsors. Soar produce really high-end running apparel. Go check them out. I'm going to be, hopefully, assuming my knee picks up, wearing all their kit at London Marathon in April. They've got a store in London, and I think there's some plans to do some activities around that on the marathon weekend. So if you're in London racing, going to be there supporting, keep an eye on their socials, because I've been told that there's going to be some cool stuff, some shakeout runs I expect, and other events going on with Soar and some of their partners out of their store on marathon weekend. So keep an eye on their socials, go and check them out. So Owain, how are we going to kick off this podcast then?
I think we should approach it in the way that I think sports science in general maybe approaches a sport. I don't know, that's vague, but if you're a sports scientist and someone comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm doing this sport, like help," and the first thing you're going to do is look at the demands of the event. And, whether that's within sports, so maybe where, like Dan, you're working with Welsh Athletics and, someone comes to you and they say, "Oh, I'm doing the 1500 meters," you're going to look at the demands of that event, right? So I think, we should talk through some of the demands of ultras, which I realize is a really, really broad area, because there is it's not like a marathon where it's the same distance every time, is it? There's a lot of a lot of variation from like 50k, which, as we've said, isn't really much more than a marathon, to 100 miles or 24 hours, and then you get really, really ultra distance, 200 miles.
Multiple day stage racing, all this sort of stuff. I mean, you go on Wikipedia, it'll go ultra running, like anything over a marathon. So that 28 miles marathon, 27 miles marathon, all that times where your Strava pops up after a marathon and it goes 26.6 miles. Done an ultra run, haven't you? Ultra runner. But obviously there is a massive range, which has its challenges in defining, but it keeps it an interesting sport, doesn't it? And I think it nearly is a different sport. Like, there's obviously loads of overlap, but in terms of the people who are running ultras, I don't know, the approach, the ethos, the funding, the structure. Like, if you think about like anything from marathon to 100 meters is governed by World Athletics. Anything over that, World Athletics don't care. It's completely different. In some ways, a completely different sport.
You could almost do a I don't know what you'd call it, like socio-economic podcast on ultras, couldn't you? Like it's
I tell you what, it's a mess though, because you've got mountain running, which is governed by one association. You've got the road ultras, which are governed by another association, and you've got UTMB, which is like the one of the biggest events in the world, but not governed by any organization. It's just UTMB. So we'll save that for another podcast, because I think there's some people in the ultra world who've got some strong opinions on whether there's on the structure of the sport, let's say. But that's probably complete. That's going down a wormhole. Let's talk about physiological demands of an ultra event, shall we?
So I guess if you're if you're approaching an ultra, like, yeah, the obvious thing, probably the thing that's in the name of it when you've signed up, is the distance. And yeah, the difference from a physiological perspective between a 50k and 100 miles is pretty massive. Some of it's going to vary based on the fitness of the athlete, but you know, if you're able to run a 50k in, you know, like 3.5 hours, like that's such a different physiological challenge to 100 miles, which is still going to take you like probably, I don't know, 14, 16 hours if you're running a 3.5 hour 50k. Like that's just such a different event already.
Different challenges. But a lot of overlap as well. And like in terms of like how you would profile an event, there's going to be very similar determinants of performance, and we've talked about them so many times. But like VO2 max, like what's your maximal aerobic capacity? How much oxygen can you get to your muscles when you're working flat out? Then you got your thresholds like LT1 and LT2. Like LT1, like the first rise in blood lactate from resting levels, so the highest speed you can run out without lactate accumulating in the blood, basically. And then LT2, that highest intensity that you can sustain, where lactate levels are elevated but remain stable over time. And that's what people conventionally think about when they think threshold. They mean that pace you can sustain for about an hour. And then you've got your economy. So actually, how good are you at converting oxygen into velocity, into speed? And all of those, to an extent, are still relevant to an ultra event, regardless of if it's 100-mile or if it's 50k, 24 hours. But I think the emphasis on what needs to be at its best, what needs to be maximized, optimized, whatever, probably changes, certainly like compared to a 5k.
Yeah,
because you could add like anaerobic capacity into the mix, which is going to be really important in a 1500 meters, even a 5k if you want a big kick at the end. But has no influence whatsoever on ultra running performance.
And I guess that's sort of the nuance we're going down or going towards, isn't it? That the importance of those shifts depending on the event. Like VO2 max is still important, but if VO2 max is equal between two athletes, then maybe one of the other determinants is actually more important. Whereas at a 5k, it's going to be a different determinant, isn't it? Yeah, it's going to be maybe anaerobic capacity.
Yeah, it's gonna make a difference. And I think, you know, I think intuitively you go, well, VO2 max for a marathon, you know, it's all about really high intensity. That's not going to be important for ultra running performance versus the shorter events where you are going to be reaching those sort of intensities. Because at no point in a 100-mile race, even at the end, where if you were going to run as hard as you could, like even in the last lap of Barry 40, you weren't at your VO2 max. No. I very much doubt, because you just can't operate at those intensities. You're too fatigued. You can't recruit your fast twitch muscle fibers to extract the oxygen. And like heart rate, you need to be at VO2 max. Your heart rate needs to be pretty much at max. And your heart rate is a response to the oxygen demands of the muscle. Like your muscles drive your heart doesn't drive your muscle. Your heart rate doesn't drive like your. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Doesn't drive your legs. Yeah. I think I'm thinking that was more reassurance for me than you. But at the same time, VO2 max is still got to be high enough. Like, and I was saying before we started recording, like if you're a 16-minute 5k runner, you're 9 times out of 10 going to beat the 20-minute 5k runner in probably any ultra distance.
Yeah. Because
the fitness differences are large. Whereas if you're a 16-minute 5k runner and you're racing a 17.5-minute 5k runner, the 17.5-minute 5k runner could definitely beat that 16-minute 5k runner if they got a profile that's set up to support them over longer distances.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's the same with VO2 max. Like it needs to be high enough, because otherwise you're not going to have enough capacity. You wouldn't be a world-class ultra runner with a VO2 max of 50.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe if we bring in although I don't have the exact paper here, but one of the papers about, you know, physiological determinants of ultras mentions velocity at VO2 max. And if, you know, if your velocity at VO2, if one runner's is like, you know, 15 kilometers an hour and one's 18, then it just then means those thresholds can bump up relatively as well, doesn't it? Like, if your VO2 max is 15k an hour, then your first threshold is probably going to be down like, I don't know, 10, 11 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
Whereas the runner with a higher VO2 max can bump it higher, can't they? So
100%. And I think that goes, and that's just echoes what we've just said, really. But in general, like, the faster you are over shorter distances, the faster you're going to be at the longer distances.
Yeah. But
obviously, it's not as clear cut as that, right? Because there's scope. VO2 max is not the only component for a start, and there are so many things that even outside of physiology, there's so many things that can go wrong in an ultra, which are going to mean that there's not going to be a perfect 1-to-1 relationship between 5k time and 100k time, for example.
Yeah, and I guess also if we think about like some of the things that go into like VO2 max, then it maybe helps illuminate it a bit more or make it clearer why it's still important. So like if you start centrally, you're going to have a bigger heart probably if you've got a bigger VO2 max, and you're going to have more blood volume, which is going to help, you know, just directly with exercise. But then also when, you know, we're saying if you're going to be out an ultra for 12 hours through the middle of the day when it's sunny, that probably also means you have a higher capacity for cooling, and that is going to be another one of the challenges, and one of the byproducts of exercise is heat generation. So if you're then able to dissipate heat, that's going to benefit your performance. And then peripherally, you're going to have better capillarization of muscle fibers, and, you know, more mitochondria, better functioning mitochondria, which all sort of then comes together to give you this VO2 max number, which is maybe more associated with just running fast. But those things still play a part when you're, you know, even if you're power hiking up a climb at UTMB, like, those things are still important, and you would prefer to have more blood to get up that climb, because it's going to help with the exercise performance, but also a range of other things as well.
And if exercise is just more submaximal, that's going to make it more tolerable, isn't it? And even if your thresholds sit at a really low percentage of your VO2 max, if you've got an enormous VO2 max, probably doesn't matter if they're quite low, because they're still going to be high relative to people who are less fit. So you can definitely get yourself more conditioned, and I think that for most people doing ultra runners, their VO2 max is not the main limiting factor, as we'll probably get onto, but eventually it will become a limiting factor. Kylian Jornet apparently has got a VO2 max of something ridiculous, isn't it like 90 apparently?
I think I've heard that. Yeah,
certainly. Like, he likes his sports science, isn't he? It's definitely above 80, right? And he's probably the best ultra runner in the world, at least historically. Maybe not quite currently. He got beat recently, didn't he?
I think he hurt himself though, maybe.
I didn't see. I just saw that the American beat him. What's his name?
Jim Wormsley. That's sunk our credibility. You just said the American.
The American. You know. I couldn't think of his name. But again, like, if you look at Jim Wormsley, like, he's run 28 minutes for 10k.
Yeah, like, he's a seriously good runner.
He was a runner in college, wasn't he? He ran like a very quick over 10k. You've got to be at the top of any ultra event. If it's, you know, high profile UTMB, you're going to be very, very good over a 10k, even a 5k. So that's like the top end. Like, that's why that's important. We've alluded to it already, that the thresholds are going to be in some ways even more important, because they determine what percentage of your VO2 max that you can sustain. And for most of the shorter events, I would say marathon, half marathon, well, for all the short event, for marathon and less, I would say your LT2 is the most important out of those thresholds. You've got to sit just below that for the majority of the time. But I think when you get to the ultra events, the LT1 probably becomes more important, And anecdotally, out of the athletes that I've seen in the lab, I've seen some athletes who are running very fast over 5K and shorter with good LT2s, but LT1's actually quite a lot lower than you'd expect. I normally see a 2K an hour difference between LT1 and LT2, whereas some athletes who are still running very well over 5K, their LT1 might be 4K below an hour below their LT2. So they've actually got quite a big gap. And I think they are the sort of athletes who would convert less well into the longer distances. It's probably to the marathon, but even more so when you go to 50 miles, 100K, 200 miles, whatever.
Yeah. It's definitely changes the importance, doesn't it?
And again, it's like what determines your LT1? It's probably having a lot of slow twitch muscle fibers with a really good mitochondrial capacity that you can rely on them without even recruiting the fast twitch fibers. And slow twitch fibers are more fatigue resistant. Their economy is better. They use less energy to produce a given amount of contractile force. They're better at burning fat. So it's probably no surprise that LT1 is going to be more important. And I think we are delving away from not away from what the literature says, but where the research base has got to in terms of characterizing marathon performance. Would you say?
I think it tends to, with ultras, it tends to focus on almost not physiology, which I think maybe speaks to the fact that it's really hard to do the research, right? And maybe that, and that actually it's not actually that dissimilar to the traditional distances. Like the same things still matter. It's whilst we said it is a completely different sport, you're also still doing the same thing, and the physiological processes that go into moving your body through running are the same. They don't change just because you're doing an ultra. But I don't know. I mean, researching for this episode, it was a bit hard and a bit frustrating in terms of some of the literature. There isn't much, and I get it. It's really hard to recruit participants, but and also probably speaks to the age of the sport.
Yeah, it's definitely a newer sport in terms of mass participation, isn't it? And I think the other thing that's difficult with the studies is doing these ones where your physiology, you do physiology testing of them, and then they go and do an ultra race, and then you look at what correlates with performance. Well, the issue is that you might be really conditioned to do the event, but you get your nutrition wrong, you have GI upset, and it doesn't matter how fit you are, you're going to pull out of a race because you can't take on liquids or fuel. Or you're going along and you get a blister at 20 miles and you've got 80 miles still to go. That's going to be a bigger determinant of performance than what your VO2 max is. So you're never going to get as good a correlation, I don't think, between it's more difficult to illuminate what actually is the main determinant of performance. In these events, because there are other factors going on, and pacing, for example, you can pace. If you just get it slightly wrong, that's going to have a huge impact on how well you do. And obviously it does in the marathon, but even then, when you blow up, you're probably going to limp home for a time slower than you wanted, but still quite a lot better than someone who's running a 5K a minute slower than you in general.
Yeah, there was that was where there was some interesting research. So there was one bit of work that looked at a 24-hour race, or I think it actually looked at a range of 24-hour races. So it actually had quite a big data set, and it found obviously over 24 hours everyone slows down, which is something we'll come on to in a minute about why. But they actually found that the fastest runners started off relatively slowest, and effectively slowed down less, which is quite an interesting, I think, finding. That suggests that they maybe know that there's an element of knowing their fitness or their physiology, and then also I guess balancing out you're going to run into musculoskeletal fatigue at some point during a 24-hour race, so you do have to find that balance of making the most of being fresh but not putting yourself in a big hole. But then they also found that 100k and shorter, they're more evenly paced races from the sort of front end runners. So maybe that speaks to sort of what we were talking about at the start, the distance or the estimated time. Like 100k for a top end runner is sort of 7 hours or less. What's the record? I think it's like 6.5 hours for.
Oh, the record's pushing 6 hours. It's about 6.5, isn't it?
So that's first of all, it's obscenely fast, but then it's almost, I don't know if there's this sort of, again, threshold. Maybe in fact it's probably somewhere where that runner's LT1 sits. Their LT1 is so high that they can almost like sneak that performance in under it and just be right, bumping right up against it the entire way, in the same way that you are down at a marathon. Like you're trying to run as close to your LT2, and for 100k and shorter it's a bit closer to LT1. Which is I don't know, maybe that's sort of where the direction of the research goes, is sort of finding that sort of time frame where it's like beyond this, then you start to really bring in these other problems or these other like features of ultras. And as you were saying as well, like with other factors, I think just with the demands of the event, like generally terrain is going to play a part. There is some ultras obviously on running tracks or on basically flat tarmac loops, but the vast majority of ultras are like bringing a trail element as well. Which that
brings a whole new series of demands. Just to flash back there, 100k world record, 6 hours 5 minutes, which is 3:39 a k. So that like goes back to like you need a high enough VO2 max. Well, for some people that would be running at VO2 max pace. Plenty of people running ultras are going to have a VO2 max where like actually that would be quite good to be at 340 a k for your VO2 max. Like, whereas this person can sustain it. Well, this person, the Lithuanian
Alexander Sorokin, isn't it?
Yeah, Alexander Sorokin. 6 hours 5 minutes 35 seconds. Like he will be running around like that with a lactate of 1. Like otherwise you wouldn't be able to sustain that intensity. I guess like the last main determinant you talk about in terms of the classic events would be running economy. And running economy, I would say, is going to be even more important in these longer events, because obviously it's beneficial if you're using less energy at a given pace, but when energy is finite, then it's even more important. Like you can take in loads of carbs, but you're never going to replace everything that you're putting out, everything that you're burning. You just can't take in carbohydrates at a high enough rate, even at the intensities that you would be running at during 100k, for example. So if we talk about calories in, and we talk about like we've said before about trying to get in 90 grams an hour, and that seems to be approaching the upper limit of the amount that the rate that you can take in carbohydrates. Well, 90 grams an hour is 360 calories, and 360 calories is enough, depending on how economical you are, is roughly enough to run about 5k. So you're going to be covering more than 5k in an hour. So that energy's got to come from somewhere, and some of it's going to come from fat, but some of it is still going to come from glycogen. So if you're more economical, then you can rely less on that muscle glycogen storage, and so have more of that left over for the back end of a race.
And then also potentially not run into those sort of stomach and gut issues if you're having to catch up with that. Which is it's amazing, isn't it? Like we try and force the carbs in so much, but you'd have to be going quite slow, very slow, to be able to match all of your energy demands from nutrition whilst you were exercising. That's maybe where if you are doing a race like UTMB, there's probably even like real front of the field that they might not be going much more than that anyway, if it's just an hour of climbing, which you don't encounter that in any other type of, well, apart from fell racing, but that's a short race. But an hour's worth of climbing, like is, yeah.
That's good. You obviously the climbing's going to put your cost up even more, like versus running on the flat. Yeah, crazy.
And I think that's a good segue. One of the sort of areas I went down with this was with the terrain and climbing and descending. Just looking at muscle activation. I think we've mentioned it briefly where we've talked about just our daily running and like running up and down hills.
100 meters an hour, 100 meters an hour. So it's a goal, isn't it?
And I just wanted to actually find an answer from there, but I think it's relevant here. Talking about or looking at the different muscle use, whether you're going uphill or downhill. And there was quite a well cited paper from 1997 that essentially found different muscle groups being activated once you start running uphill. And then, as we were talking about with LT1 or staying below that so that you're only using sort of slow twitch muscle fibers, but depending on the muscle groups, there is going to be a different composition of muscle fibers. So, if you're running on the flat, you might be just using muscle groups that are mostly slow twitch because that's what you do in your daily training. Because when you're training, I'm pretty certain, right, if I'm remembering this right, that only the sort of muscle groups used are the ones that get any sort of change from training.
Yeah, I mean that's what we typically say. But if you're only going to train the fibers you recruit, and the fibers you recruit are proportional to the amount of force you need to produce. So you start running uphill, you're going to recruit slightly different fibers because of the orientation of the force you're going to require to put down, but also you're going to increase the amount of force you need to produce is higher as well. So you will recruit more fast twitch fibers, assuming that you can't match that with just slow twitch fibers. So it probably does, because if you're training for a hilly race, you're not going to be able to get away with doing flat running. And that's just the uphill.
And then when it comes to downhill, it's a much more eccentric muscle loading pattern, which is generally why, like, if you just go out and go and do a hilly run with lots of like downhill, especially if you run it quite hard and you don't normally do that, you'll then feel like really, really domsy the next couple of days because just using a completely different loading pattern.
So like eccentric loading just means you are lengthening you're short. Wait a minute, let me get this right.
Eccentric lengthening.
Yeah, so you're lengthening the muscle but under tension. So normally you think when you're lengthening a muscle, you're relaxing it, but actually you're doing it in a controlled way so that your legs don't just buckle when you hit the floor. And that sort of loading is associated with a lot more muscle damage than concentric loading, which would be like the upwards motion of a squat, for example.
And what the paper I found sort of in talking about this and looking at some of the previous research, mentioned the fact that there isn't really anything you can do during the activity to reduce the amount of muscle damage. So they looked at like compression garments, footwear, or like changing how you actually run. You can't stop that muscle damage. The only way you need to train for it. And it doesn't take much to do so, but that's another element of ultras, like maybe a marathon like Boston or some of these unique American marathons that are entirely downhill. You might encounter that, but generally that's going to be something you're encountering in an ultra where you're going to need to prepare for that, and that's maybe one where if we have a 16-minute 5k runner and 20-minute 5k runner, if the 16-minute 5k runner doesn't prepare for that, then they might not actually be able to finish the race because they can't walk.
Exactly.
But that's one of these more unique demands based on the terrain.
And again, like there is eccentric loading when you're just running on the flat, and you will see people who have not prepared for a London Marathon with horrendous DOMs for days afterwards, but actually running downhill, it's magnified even more. Like the eccentric loading is now enormous, and so you can get the same level of DOMs doing a local fell race if you're not prepared for it versus doing a marathon.
Yeah.
If you're if you're not accustomed to fast downhill running, because obviously the braking forces are going to be so much higher when you're running fast downhill.
Yeah. And then maybe some of the other demands, like we sort of touched on it, but like, what the weather and heat management, I think is an important thing to consider. Generally you're not going to be, especially if we think about things like UTMB, like you're not going to be in the mountains in the winter, like you're going to be out there in the summer. And a byproduct of exercise is heat production, which, over a 5K is fine. Like you just finish and you're pretty sweaty. Even on the hottest of days, like you can get through a 5K. You might be a little bit slower, but you can get through it. Whereas in an ultra, if you are just exposed to heat and producing heat, it's something that you've really, really got to manage. And again, comes back to, one of the factors that goes into VO2 max is blood volume, and having a bigger blood volume is going to allow you to cool yourself more effectively, because you'll just have a bigger plasma volume.
Yeah. And the other thing that goes into VO2 max is obviously when we normally talk about it, it's scaled to weight.
Yeah.
Well, weight is going to have a massive influence on heat dissipation as well. Unfortunately, being taller is also worse for getting rid of your heat. So because you've got a larger surface area to volume ratio, a smaller surface area to volume ratio, so you're worse. I'm getting it all wrong today. So you can only lose heat from your surface. If you're tall, then you've got more volume, but actually not proportionally, that's much more surface area to dissipate heat from. And again, the same with if you're carrying excess weight, if you've got then it's more difficult to dissipate heat. So like Kilian Jornet looks like a stick, and there's no coincidence, I guess.
And he's not the tallest guy.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, no runners are that tall, are they? Why am I a runner?
Can't get picked in other sports.
Yeah, exactly. If you can't do everything else, just run.
I guess something you mentioned just with people getting DOMs at London Marathon, like what another again, it feels sort of obvious. There's some stuff in the sort of like limited literature base about ultras that's really obvious. Like one of them was like ultra performance is determined by age, BMI, and VO2 max, which it's obvious. Someone has to write it down. But there was another sort of interesting thread that was talking about like pain perception, and basically saying that like generally you have better pain perception or lower pain perception, higher pain tolerance if you're finishing more towards the sort of front of a 100-mile event, which I thought again was interesting, which sort of suggests again something we've talked about a few times, and we mentioned earlier that it doesn't matter how conditioned your muscles are, you are going to get fatigued in an ultra. And again, coming back to a 5K, like it'd be pretty rare to finish a 5K and feel like there was any sort of muscle fatigue holding you back. Like that would suggest more issues with like taper and training, wouldn't it? But an ultra, I don't know, just off in my head, it'd be interesting to ask someone like Kilian, like, how bad do your legs feel at the end of UTMB? I'd imagine pretty bad. But there is some, it makes sense. They are able to push through some amount of pain and maybe tolerate it better as well.
I reckon that's quite a small component. I think people are actually very good at pushing themselves.
Yeah.
And I think there's probably a different skill to pushing yourself over an ultra. But at the same time, just how we talk about a 2-hour marathon is completely different to a 4-hour marathon. Well, Kilian doing UTMB in 18 and 19 hours is very different to someone who's out there for 30 hours. He will be able to work at a higher intensity and push himself more. Like you can just run closer to your max, and obviously you're still quite a long way below. But I reckon up the hills, he's he's going to be working pretty hard, and it's going to feel pretty hard even on the first climb of the circuit. He's of the course. He's going to be he will be able to push the intensity higher because he's not going to be out there for as long.
And just being not being out there as long, like he only has to tolerate the pain for 18 hours, whereas someone else has to do it for 30. Like it's a big difference. It's one where on one hand it makes sense, on the other hand, like there is some obvious like reasons why, isn't there? Like probably he's going to also be lighter than someone that's running it in 30 hours, so there's going to be like maybe a bit less loading, and because he's running faster, he's just going to take less footsteps, so less muscle contractions. There's reasons to it, but I thought that was quite interesting. Like it makes sense, doesn't it? Like if you're a good runner, you're probably not going to get into ultras if your pain tolerance isn't great at the same time. So I know there are, but I think there are people who go and do ultras because they don't like the pain of running really hard for 5k. Different type of pain,
but it's a different pain. Like you've got and there's as we've said already, there's becomes other factors, and I think the psychology of it is definitely really important. Like maybe not even just pain, but just being able to manage yourself and put up with discomfort for a long period of time. Like some people just aren't wired for that, are they? I think we've talked a bit about like the ability to use fat as a fuel source, but I think that's worth paying a bit more attention to, because I think we alluded it to the start when we were talking about like that LT1. But if you can increase your ability to use fat as a fuel source, then that is obviously going to help spare glycogen, and you would think allow for better performance in the back end of a race. But I think people get the wrong, and that's all true and intuitive, but I think people get it wrong in terms of the approach to improve that, because I think that if you improve the VO2 max thresholds and economy, you are just going to get, it's not an isolated thing. You're going to get better at burning fat. Your LT1 is so correlated to fat oxidation rates. As soon as you go past LT1, your fat oxidation rates drop. Fat oxidation rates drop massively. So if you just do easy running, like you would for any distance, you're going to get better at burning fat as a fuel source. And if you just generally get fitter, like if your 5k time improves, you've probably got better at using fat as a fuel source, because you've got more and better mitochondria, which are how you burn fat. Like it's all tied together, Often you do see everything improve at once, like VO2 max thresholds, fat oxidation rates.
I'm not sure. Like I think we've maybe covered everything as a sort of an initial dive.
I reckon
like it's difficult because like we said, there it's a completely different sport, but the same things still go into it generally, with some nuances, like with the with fat burning, like that doesn't matter in a 5k, but it's enabled by a physiological component that is important in a 5k.
100%. And it's like it does. There are just slightly different levers you need to pull, like to get as good as you can at ultra running. Like, and I think for most people, the first point is just get fit, isn't it? Like get fit over 5k, 10k, half. And if you get fitter over a 10k, you've probably got fitter over if you were to race an ultra as well. But then once you get close to an event and you're probably reaching your genetic limits a bit more, then that's when you probably do need to be a bit more targeted in your approach and really go into like, what sort of race am I training for? Is it a mountainous race? How long is it? Do I need to improve my fatigue resistance, my durability, my ability to maintain my economy all the way into the depths of a 24-hour race? That's where the differences are going to lie. Like, your fresh physiology are going to be the biggest predictors initially, but then if you want to if you think you could only ever be a 16-minute 5K runner and you've maxed out that potential, you probably still can do things to improve your ultra running performance.
Yeah. And I guess also some of it comes back to like decision making, which isn't really physiology, but what you do early on in an ultra is really going to affect the end of it. I guess in the same way as a 5K, but it's a different decision, isn't it? Like where in a 5K, it's
pretty instinctive, isn't it? You haven't got much time to make a decision. Whereas in a marathon, in a ultra, you're going to have to really pay attention to your body, look after yourself, and be strict with yourself and go, right, I am going to take this gel, even though I don't want this gel.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm going to, like you did, like change your shoes in Barry. Like you're going to have to make those sort of decisions and not just ignore them, because ignoring them is the easy thing to do, and just going, oh well, I've just put up with it, and then something that was very minor becomes something very major, doesn't it? Like a blister. And that's gonna
fueling, cooling, everything.
And all of that stuff. Then, well, your VO2 max is out the window. Then.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think a good first dive into ultras. Like we said, we're definitely gonna have another couple of episodes on ultras, because it's an interesting side of the sport, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you're all keen because he's got his Welsh vest in 100k now. Have we ever actually said that on the podcast?
We have.
Yeah, so we're
soft launching it now.
Soft launching it off the back of Barry. Owain's getting his first Welsh vest, running the Anglo-Celtic Plate 100k, making up the Welsh team.
Yeah.
How many weeks are we to go now?
At the time of recording, 5. I don't know how many it'll be when this comes out, but
yeah. So
unfortunately not loads of time. It would have been interesting to have a few months, but
so
quick turnaround.
We're learning on the job, aren't we, here, talking about training, whilst Owain quickly works out how to optimize his training for 100k versus a 40. And recover from the 40-mile race and taper into the 100k. But that's another challenge for another episode, I think.
But hope everyone enjoyed. First dive, and we'll be back to ultras. Cheers for listening.
Yep. See you again soon.